book nerds. I'm Aubrey.
And I'm Peyton.
And today we are going to be talking about a new age Greek classic, A Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller.
So join us with a cup of coffee as we dive between these paper sheets.
Alright, before we begin, this episode is going to be divided into two parts. The first, we're going to be discussing A Song of Achilles and giving a non-spoiler review and also the work and style of the author Madeline Miller. The second half of this episode, we are going to be giving our thoughts with full spoilers about the ending and anything we want to discuss.
Yes, so as always, let's jump into a overall plot summary of the book. So according to Goodreads, this world dives into our two main characters who are Achilles and Patroclus. Achilles is the best of all the Greeks. He's the son of the cruel sea goddess Thetis and the legendary king Peleus. He's strong, swift, and beautiful, irresistible to all who meet him. On the other side, Patroclus is an awkward young prince who is exiled from his homeland after an act of shocking violence. They're brought together by chance, and they forge an inseparable bond despite the risks of the god's wrath. So, it's been some time since Aubrey and I read this book, so yes. We are super excited to dive into it today, and also the origin stories, which is the Iliad. That's what this whole book started from, and we're gonna dive more into that, and more so the plot is amazing, but it's really the characters that set this book apart.
Yes, this novel highlights the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles and what makes it different from other retellings of the Iliad, because Homer's Iliad is a classic. People eat that shit up. But what makes it different from the other retellings is the point of view, because in this story, it is told through the lens of Patroclus, and that shapes the lens in which we consume not only the story and the plot as a whole, but also of how we view Achilles.
Exactly. Patroclus's point of view is what sets this story apart from others. We know everyone should know is the Achilles story and how it is a tragic story. So going into this, we already kind of know Achilles' fate. So seeing it from another point of view is so cool to me. And then also diving into the relationship between the two characters, Madeline really took a turn of how these characters are portrayed versus how they are in the Iliad.
Yeah, in the Iliad, you see Achilles as the strong, mighty destiny warrior that he is, and we do see that in the Song of Achilles as well. But since we are being told this story through the lens of Patroclus, we are also like, he's so beautiful, he's so warm, he's so amazing, because Patroclus is falling in love with Achilles, and that adds a layer to how we see this badass demigod.
Yes, yeah. And so, my favorite thing about this book is the lens we see through with Patroclus' story, and we see the admiration he has for Achilles, and it gives us a whole new perspective on Achilles. Whether that opinion shifts throughout the book, that's up to the reader, but it's just so fascinating to see a story that is so famous. It's almost like a Romeo and Juliet, but it's told by an outsider, right? Because the characters are very complex in this book, and Madeline took two famous and infamous characters and just totally transformed them through her writing.
I love that Patroclus and Achilles are kind of like foils of each other. They're very opposite, and Patroclus is also, and I know that, so Madeline does a really accurate job of describing, of the retelling and making it true. And I think the part where she embellished the most is that I feel like Patroclus comes off a little bit more feminine than he actually was. And even just like the ideas of him being less of a warrior soldier, so that way in that kind of reflection, Achilles seems more like the warrior soldier.
Yes, and a cool thing, as you said before, Patroclus is, with it once again being told from his perspective, we're following his story. And we see them from young boys.
Yeah.
Innocent. Up until, I have feelings for this person. And we are learning more about Achilles, but we're also learning more about Patroclus and his feelings. And then we see them all the way up until, of course, the Trojan War starts, and Achilles is called to go do what he is always meant to do. So I love seeing the evolution. Like, it really takes us from beginning to end.
Yes.
And I think that some stories don't do that.
No, we see everything there is to see, and I think that that's really interesting.
Yes, and I would love to throw in here, obviously we're, throwing some admiration for these characters, but I do think jumping into this book, for someone who hasn't read it, there are some cons to these characters that we have kind of come to know. We're going to get more into that later, but I just kind of wanted to touch on maybe some of the downsides to these characters. One that I can say is, going to this book, I just wanted a little bit more from the characters. Sometimes I felt like Patroclus had Bella syndrome from like Twilight, where he kind of doted on Achilles too much. I feel like he wasn't really his own person. Even though we're following his story, we're also following the downsides, maybe, of his character, where we see there's some flaws.
Yeah, and I think that comes into the fact that his main role is his relationship with Achilles, and then even though he's the narrator, like, the story is about Achilles. This is the song of Achilles. This isn't the song of Patroclus and Achilles. And so you're kind of just, you're being told the story from the second main character and not the main character. But then because Patroclus is now such a main character being told through him, like, you want to see him taking more, like, action and more purpose throughout the story. And I think there is moments that you see that, but a lot of the times he is, not acting with his own agency, but just with the idea of, I just need to do whatever Achilles is doing. I just need to follow Achilles. I just need to be with Achilles.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think there's a good side of that and a downside of that. It's like, wow, he has nothing but love for this person. He wants to be Achilles' hype man. Like, there's so much love there. But then, like, the strong, like, independent woman side of me is like, you don't need him. Like, you don't need to get, dragged along by this man. Because Achilles, like, and I'm happy she stuck true to this, but he does read kind of like an egotistical a-hole, because that's his character, right? And I'm happy she didn't make Achilles go soft. But then, with that being said, in those intimate moments, it is kind of nice to see Achilles' character kind of get stripped down. It's like, oh, like, you have depth to you. You're not just this born-bred killer that's meant to defend. So, that's a food for thought when jumping into this book. Finally, we're going to discuss the style of this book, which is very, very important. So Madeline Miller has her bachelor's and master's in classics. So makes sense why she's written the Song of Achilles and Circe. So this is a very accurate retelling. She is such a strong prose. And I have a quote here that I wrote down from the book that I've always remembered. And I think this kind of, like, shows just like is this Shakespeare right now? Like, this is crazy. So this is Patroclus talking about Achilles, and he says, I could recognize him by touch alone, by smell. I would know him blind by the way his breath came and his feet struck the earth. I would know him in death and at the end of the world. Girl.
That is like so beautiful, so romantic.
Like, if anyone said that to me, I'd be like, let's get married. I want you in my life forever. You know, like looking at your boyfriend or husband, you're like, you could never.
Yeah.
Patroclus is really setting the bar high for all partners now. So yeah, like once again, like the admiration he has for Achilles and Madeline Miller's just, oh my gosh, like it's perfect. That is a perfect description.
She does, like, her writing style is a work of art. And I think that sometimes we get confused when we read books, especially when we read books like for plot and character, and all of those things are obviously, like, that's why you're reading a story. Yeah. But I think sometimes when we get too engrossed, or I don't know, that there's moments where we forget that writing is an art form.
Yes.
And you cannot forget that when reading this book. And I think that Brandon Sanderson, who is like the talk of the town for adult fantasy right now, describes this really well. And it's this idea of, like, when we as readers are reading a story, we're reading it almost through a window. Okay, so we're on one side, and then there's a window, and then there's this story that's happening. And some writers will try their best to make that window as crisp and as clean and smudge-free as possible, so that way there's nothing interrupting the reader from viewing and reading the story. Other authors, like Madeline Miller, with such amazing prose, is going to take a more stained glass approach, in which your window is this intricately cathedral-designed window. And then, you know, you're getting this, like, extra bit of art between you and the story that's being told, which is awesome. But I also think that you know, that still is muddying your view. And so for me, it's a little bit harder to get engrossed into the story, because the whole time I'm like, oh my god, that was so beautiful. Oh, this is such good writing. Oh my goodness, I love that line. This is a book you want to annotate. This is a book you want to sit down with your highlighter, and you want to be like, that was amazing. I'm obsessed with this. And so it's just kind of a different way of consuming the story.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect example, right? Like, when I read this story, I'm not like, I'm in love with these characters and I'm in love with this plot line. No, I'm in love with her writing style.
Yes.
Right. I am reading Madeline Miller for her. I'm reading it because it's her, and I want to read her writing. Maybe it's because I'm not the biggest, like, Greek mythology fan, but, like, I'm not invested in these characters. I'm not invested in the story. Maybe it's because I kind of already knew the Iliad and Achilles' story, but why this book made a top list for me is because of the writing and because of the prose, right? When we go into an art gallery, we're there to analyze the work, and, you know, I'm not going to say, like, oh, this painting's my favorite because of the plot. Like, no, because we're looking at the intricacies of it. And yeah, I think the stained glass theory is a perfect way to explain that, because there are so many ways to analyze it than just, hey, this is A and B, this is the plot, these are the characters. And that's why, you know, I love books, because I like to get invested in the plot and characters. But this kind of shifted, you know, my perspective. I felt like I had to look, like, introspectively at it, if that makes sense. More so than, like, oh, this is just, you know, A, B, and C. So I think that's what could make or break this book for someone. But I think that if you're a true reader and you're here for good writing, you're gonna love her writing style.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you go into this book, there's going to be a little bit of distance between you and the story, but that distance is filled with beautiful, beautiful prose. And you just, when you go into it, know that in your mind. Be like, yeah, you're going to be reading this, and you're going to be like, that's some pretty good writing. So in all, I would absolutely recommend A Song of Achilles. It has become a staple read for the 21st century, and it does tell such a beautiful love story between Patroclus and Achilles. Like, you're watching such a beautiful thing unfold with beautiful writing attached to it.
All right, so now we are transitioning into the spoiler part of the podcast.
Yes.
So if you have, spoiler. If you have not read this book yet and you want to, it is time to turn off the video. Read it and come back and watch this part, and we can talk about it. So if you want to read this book, we will see you. We love you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. All right. Now that they're hopefully gone, or they just want the spoilers, whatever. Peyton and I have one gripe with The Song of Achilles, and we've kind of got into it just a little bit. And this is not Madeline Miller's fault. This is not the book's fault. This is Book Talk's fault, because I don't like to say overhyped, because it was like, I needed to read this book. However, you do know going in that it's a tragic ending, and watching people bawl their eyes out on TikTok, and it is a very sad, tragic ending, but neither one of us cried.
No, because I wasn't surprised. Like, I knew it was coming, and I don't know, maybe people got more invested in the characters than I did, and maybe that says a lot about me, but I did not cry. It just wasn't as emotional for me. Once again, like, I will die on the hill that I think this book is amazing, and I think this book will go down as a classic. But I did not cry, and I think it's because every single day, it must have been earlier last year. Every day I went on TikTok, Song of Achilles, people crying, like trigger warning, like, I'm gonna cry during this book, and I'm waiting, and I'm reading, and every chapter I'm waiting for it, and then I was at the end, and I was like, oh, I'm sad. But people were bawling their eyes out. Like, mascara down to their chin, like, bawling their eyes out. And I just didn't have that. I didn't have that.
No. And, you know, maybe if you went in and you really didn't know the ending, because, I mean, you know some from Greek, but also, even if I didn't know that, like, on Book Talk, seeing that it was going to be sad, you go in with the idea of, oh, this is a Greek tragedy. I'm going to go in and I'm going to get a Greek tragedy. And I think knowing that, you're just waiting for it, and the anticipation, like, that makes it so much harder to actually be that sad, because you're just, it's become bigger than it was intended to be. And I think that if I went into this with zero thoughts, with zero prior knowledge, I think I would have cried. But there's also, going back to the prose, because of that distance, even the really sad moments, like, I was never like, in this story, I'm Patroclus. I am the main character. I am in the main character's, like, head fully. I am always like, I'm in love with Madeline Miller. And
yes, I'm like, I love her.
I'm obsessed with her and her writing and her style. And I think that distance, I'm like reading this super sad ending, and I'm like, oh my god, it's so gorgeous how she's writing this heartbreak.
Yes, I was like, oh, like, at the end, like, you know how, like, Achilles' son is, like, a total, like, butt, and they wouldn't bury them together, and then at the end, they're like, oh my god, that's so, like, amazing. And I'm like, good for them. Like, this is so tragic, and this is so beautiful now, and, like, this is great. But at the end of the day, like, they didn't read like characters to me. They read like figures in history that are from this epic, and you know, this is just a retelling of their story. And once again, maybe I just am not well read enough. Like, I don't know, maybe, you know, because some people, I could see the argument that's like, that's the point, is that we're diving into these characters in a way we never have before, and we're seeing emotions we haven't before, and that's why it's so amazing. I don't necessarily agree with that, because maybe I have main character energy, where I want to be like oh, like, I'm this main character, I can relate. So I don't know. It's a hard one.
Yeah, And I really do, I appreciate it all, and I feel like it was so well done for what it is.
Yes.
I don't know. There just felt like the distance with the prose made me not as attached. I was attached to the book more than the characters, and I know that other people didn't feel that way. And like, what I hate is because like this is just, I think it's so important that this book shows such a deep romantic gay love story. I think that is like, that's something that is just so amazing, especially, I mean, this was published in 2011, and like we're still in 2023. Like there's not that many books out there that
represent that
on like the main characters on a gay love story. There definitely are more than there was, and it's getting better, but there still isn't. And so I hate to be like, oh well, I didn't love these characters, knowing what that is, and it's
yes. See, and that's why I don't like talking about it. Yeah. So this is what I can say about the characters, and why I think Madeline Miller is a badass, because she took famous characters and she's like, you know what? We need to talk about the elephant in the room. Patroclus and Achilles love each other. And this is a gay love story that needs to be told. And, you know, even in 2011, like, that was bold of her to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I don't know, it's like taking a Shakespeare novel and, like, turning it on its head. Because in the Iliad, it's like, that's not really talked about. Like, you kind of see that.
It's not about Achilles. It's really not about Patroclus.
Yeah. So, you know, but I just think that part of the character, I'm just, like, obsessed with. I'm just like, they love each other. Like, this is so cool that she did that. And once again, that goes back to just, I love Madeline Miller.
Yeah.
Because she did that.
And I think reader expectation, like we said before, like, just seeing Book Talk bawl their eyes over this, and it definitely is that. And I think I would have cried if I didn't see everyone else crying. Because knowing that everyone else cried, I went into it and I was like, when am I going to cry? What is the moment? What is the section? And then you get to it and you're like, oh, duh, this is definitely the moment.
Is the time.
But I was searching for it.
Yes, right. And it's like that phrase, like, you can't search for love, it'll find you. And so that's kind of how good books are, right? It's like, you will find your most favorite book when you're least expecting it. And so if you tell me, I love book reviews and what we're doing is great, and I hope you read the books we hype up, but just know that sometimes, like, the best books come out of nowhere, and it's because, you know, so if I have a book that I'm interested in reading, I will be like, okay, saw that, I'm not going to listen to anything anyone has to say about this book until I've read it myself.
Yep. Yeah.
And I do that for everything, just for this reason. And Song of Achilles taught me that. You know, because I'm like, people are getting tattoos with quotes. Like, this book is, like, legendary. And, I closed the book and I just sat there. And I was like, is it me? Am I the problem?
Am I the villain?
Am I the villain? Like, should I be crying? Should I fake cry and post it on TikTok? Like, so, yeah. But, you know, that this book is like a B+ for me because of that. But, like, obviously, like, we're doing a podcast about it. We love this book. And this is a story that needs to be told. And it's definitely a book I think that everyone should read. And if you don't cry, just know, we didn't either.
We didn't either. You're not alone.
You're not alone.
You might be a cold-hearted, but you're not alone.
But you're not alone. I was like, maybe I need to go to therapy. Maybe it is a me problem.
Villain origin story. I didn't cry for the Song of Achilles.
Yeah, that's our villain origin story. That should be like when you make book friends, be like, So did you cry during Song of Achilles or not?
That was actually Peyton and I. One of our first book bonding conversations was about how we didn't cry about Song of Achilles.
Yes, I was like, I remember saying hey Aubrey, did you read Song of Achilles? She's like, yes, and it was like a yeah, and I was like, oh, I was like, you didn't cry, and you're like, no, and I was like, me either.
Oh my goodness.
And I have a good friend that couldn't finish the book because she's like, I love the characters, but I'm not feeling it. I have to come back to it because she wanted to give her whole attention to the story. And then she's like, I can't do it. Cause going back to the prose, if you're not a prosy type of person, this book can it can be really hard to get into. It took me a second coming from basic fantasy writing, which can be complex, but very, plot character driven. I was like, I'm like, this is so philosophical, and I'm in my bag, with feelings now, and you have to kind of change your perspective of what you're reading. It's like accessing a whole other side of your brain.
Yeah, this is an adult fantasy book. This is an adult book. This is, and it's not because of the content in it is too graphic in any way. It is because there is a thicker prose. You're going to have your little noggin on while you're reading this book to understand what's happening and to appreciate what's happening. And especially if you read a lot of YA fantasy, a lot of YA fantasy, the prose is stripped down, like I was saying earlier, for that clear window, so that way you can understand exactly what's happening in the story and just be that immersed with the story. And this is a piece of art, and you need to treat it as such.
Yes, as I said, imagine you're going into the Met and you are going to observe art all day. That's what reading this book is about. This isn't an Emily Henry love story. This is deep. You will be in your feelings, and maybe you'll have a cry. We didn't, but
maybe you'll cry.
Maybe you'll cry, and if you did, let us know.
If you made it to this section of the video, you probably already read the book. Did you cry?
Did you cry? And if you did, you can make us feel bad about ourselves.
But rate us in the comments section for not crying. We know.
Yeah, I mean, at least you know that our reviews are honest. Because this is a really hard thing for me to admit, that I did not cry while reading this book. So, I carry this shame on me every time I pick up a book now. I'm like, well, I'm not as sure. I didn't cry, so. Yeah. Good story, though.
A+ for me.
All right, we are done for the day. You made it to the end. Whether you bawled your eyes out, felt like it was overhyped, or you just think it's a wonderful piece of art like we do, let us know in the comments. We want to hear what you have to say about this book, whether you make us feel bad about ourselves or not. That's up to you. But yeah, definitely let us know in the comments. And also let us know if we should read and review Song of Achilles' sister book, Circe. It's been on my list for a long time, but I haven't read it.
I know. I want to so bad. So force us to do it. Make us do it.
Yeah, force us.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and happy reading.
Happy reading.